Okay. Wow. We've got a big guest. I'm very excited to be talking to Professor Joan C. Williams. Her latest book, she's written many, is up on the screen. But if you're listening, How the Left Lost the Working Class and How to Win Them Back. Outclassed. Professor Williams, what an honor to have you on for the first time. Really appreciate you joining me today.
I'm delighted to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
Of course. So, first of all, what is your reaction to Zohran Mamdani's win in New York? What does that mean?
I think it really shows the way forward for Democrats. He was really focused, for example, on economic issues. And what I have argued is that Democrats should be laser focused on a particular theme, which is that hard work should pay off in a stable middle class life where you can afford a house, you can afford childcare, you can afford the kind of stability that middle class people seek, whether they're college grads or non-college grads. And he was very focused on the kinds of affordability issues that even college grads are now beginning to have.
You've written books lots on gender. You've written about race and obviously economics, socioeconomics, all of it. You're an expert on all of this. It sounds like his message was similar to the message we've heard from Senator Bernie Sanders for, it seems, a generation, but certainly Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the two of them out on their anti-oligarchy tour, but several other Democrats sharing that message. Critics call it socialism. Maybe it is. I don't like the word. I think it ruins everything. But in terms of what they're saying, is that similar? Obviously, they endorsed Mamdani, but they've been saying it for years. I feel like this is the argument that you make, a lot of what they say. Do you disagree with the messages that they have been making on these issues?
You know, any Democrat that goes into a red district and attracts just astonishingly large crowds has got my attention. And that's exactly what the anti-oligarchy tour did. And it's, the research shows why anti-elitist rhetoric attracts working class voters without losing support from other voters. And it goes back to exactly the Mamdani message. 70 to 86% of Americans, if you believe that, 70 to 86% of Americans believe that the rich earn too much and that everybody else earns too little, and they support government programs to fix that.
I once made an argument to the audience of a Fox News TV show hosted by Mike Huckabee. He had a live audience, Joan. And the argument I made to them, because he set me up to fail, going, Pete Dominic's a progressive before we even went live. And I said to the audience, I said, in terms of the percentage of taxes you pay on your income, you pay way more on the actual work that you do than what many wealthy people do on the money they make from their investments. How is that fair? They all agreed. If you package the message, but it gets demagogued and demonized as, socialism, I guess. What do you do?
I think the fact is, I've been on Fox too. I think the guy's name was Steve Carter. And I introduced myself as a San Francisco progressive, and he was taken aback when he heard me talk. I think that, one of the reasons that Republicans don't want Democrats talking like this is because there's some key wedge issues between Republicans and Democrats. And if you can believe it, working class Republicans are even more supportive of raising taxes on the wealthy than Democrats are. And there's like a 20-point gap between wealthy and working class Republicans on the issue of whether corporations are earning too much. So these, I'm a capitalist. I believe in capitalism. I believe that you should free people's ability to follow their dreams and their imaginations. But you know what? What's good for small business is often not what's good for big business, and vice versa. And Republicans want us to forget the difference Democrats should be reminding us every day that often what Republicans do is good for big business, but it's not for small business. And by the way, who's going to get exemptions from the Trump tariffs, the taco tariffs? Who do you think? Big business or small business?
Well, it'll be interesting to see. Certainly, it'll be more likely big business. But even if small business got those exemptions, those things water down in supply chain and so on. So even if you got an exemptions, if you need parts, everybody gets hit.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
it's interesting to hear Joan C. Williams talk sound like a full-throated capitalist, but I feel like those words stink. I feel like they taint the conversation that we're talking about because I don't know what it means. I mean, when I think about these platforms, the policy of Zohran Mamdani or AOC, or I'm just interested in the issues and what they're talking about. Sounds good to me, and I would think it sounds good to most New Yorkers or most Americans when they talk about ideas like universal pre-K. It's a winner for everybody, Joan, right? Like, shouldn't we focus on the policies or not? Do we lose people?
Universal pre-K is a good policy to focus on. It has been adopted in some, as you probably know, in some very red states. I think it's important to focus on some policies, but also going back to the major theme is that hard work used to pay off and hard work doesn't pay off anymore. It doesn't pay off in a stable middle class life. And I think that, people can call me socialist, they can call me capitalist, they can call me, I don't care. But that's the theme that I think Democrats should continue to go back to. And if once they do that, one of the things they're going to notice is that DOGE's cuts, they're cutting a lot of government programs that undergird Americans' ability to sustain that stable middle class standard of living. They're cutting Social Security and Medicare funding, or they're cutting Social Security, Medicare personnel, so that sure, you're entitled, but you can't get through to anyone.
If this was the case, if what you're saying is true, I'm sure it is, the statistics in terms of the research on folks of certain income classes and so on, how come it doesn't work to convince them something like, if you cut people at the IRS, then you're going to have way less money coming into the government? Like, how come it doesn't convince them that when you spend money on certain government programs, when you invest in certain programs and personnel and ideas, you get way more back? Certainly that's the case at the IRS or any other agency, generally speaking. The government and government agencies have been so demonized. How can you possibly message in such a way that will convince people that it's really a great investment?
I think government programs have been demonized for a number of reasons. Partly it's what people are calling the difference between redistribution and pre-distribution. I was talking about the sky-high levels of Americans that believe that we don't have a fair labor market and that the government should help create one. That's what's called pre-distribution. But very often, Democrats have focused instead on redistributive programs often that are tightly targeted to the poor. Now, if you have a program where you get benefits if you're poor, but you don't get benefits if you're just one notch above, you're going to set up a dynamic where you pit the have-a-littles against the have-nots. And that's what a lot of those means-tested programs have done. In contrast, universal programs like Social Security, that's the third rail of American politics. But I do think that the tariffs and DOGE have really present Democrats with a generational opportunity to explain to Americans that many government programs undergird their ability to stay afloat and live a life of dignity. You know what's a good example? Farm subsidies. Farm subsidies and just the ability to send your soybeans to China. That's the kind of thing that we should be focusing on. And if people call us names, that's fine. People are going to call names when they don't want you to understand that what they're doing is undercutting your ability to support your family with dignity.
Yeah, no, I don't mind name calling. I'm thinking a lot about, I think a lot about messaging, which is, something obviously you understand a lot more about than I do. And I just feel like when we name certain things, we lose the opportunity to get through to someone to explain what this would do to make their lives better. Getting back to some of these ideas though, and some of these issues, you didn't mention, and, it's kind of new, but is immigration. A whole bunch of Americans are learning that many of the folks that they are now grabbing and removing from the country, deporting, are what we named essential workers during the pandemic. And a whole bunch of people that were certainly fine with getting rid of undocumented people who were criminals are finding out that the vast majority of them, as many of us knew, were actually hardworking folks who we depend on. And now a lot of people are learning that that's a real problem. Would you add that to the messaging, or just to the simple paradigm that people are currently learning in real time?
I think this is another, again, it's a teachable moment here. And one of the things the Democrats should be doing, and they are, is pointing out that there's been a bait and switch. Trump said he was going to get order at the border and he was going to deport criminals, and that is not what he's doing. And pointing out to people that farmers now have crops rotting in the fields. I mean, the Democrats have really struggled with farmers in recent decades. So to point out to them that we are standing up for the workers that you rely on, farmers. And the other thing that's really important, small business is really cherished by non-college voters. And that's because owning a small business is the best hope many of them have to moving from being an order taker to being an order giver and an owner. And so to point out how these completely out of control deportations are hurting small businesses and depriving them of workers that they need to survive. The other thing that Democrats should talk a lot more about is that, who are these immigrants? Often they are working class people with working class values, faith, family, community, just the kind of values that are held by the non-college voters that Democrats have struggled with so much. Instead, I hear a lot of talk about there's disappearances, and when one person is, one group has disappeared, they're coming from you. And I understand that that's rhetoric that we inherited from World War II, and it's very resonant for some people. I mean, my mom was Jewish. I understand how that's very resonant for many, many people, but it's not resonant for the non-college voters, many of them who Democrats need to lure back a lot more of.
I'm really excited to be talking to you. You've been studying this and writing about these issues for a long time. And so sorry to, ask you a question I probably should know the answer to, but I'm going to get read up and become a Joan C. Williams expert and talk to you again. But I do want to get your diagnosis on how we got here. And I don't know. I mean, I kind of wanted to point to Obama, going from Obama to Trump and that election. I mean, you talked a lot about and wrote a lot about that at the time. And I'm still not quite sure of what your analysis is of what happened there. I mean, did Obama lose working class voters? And if so, why would they go to a guy who lives in a golden mansion?
No, Obama did a great job connecting with the white working class in the heartland for a very simple reason. He was brought up by his grandparents for substantial periods, who were white people from Kansas. Obama knew how to talk to people. Now, he did have some bloopers, like clinging to guns and religion. He said that was my biggest bonehead move, but he did a great job. But what happened is, in short, the one word for it is neoliberalism, is that Democrats were very focused on, frankly, white working class men, and they were the center of Democrats' coalition in the decades after World War II. And then my generation of hippies came up, and we were much more focused on environmentalism and various racial and gender projects that have formed my life work, frankly. And I think it's not so simple as to say we just need to go back to the post-World War II coalition, because I actually care about those gender and racial equality projects, but I don't think we need to choose. We definitely don't need to choose, because one of the things that we saw in the last election is that non-college people of color have veered away from Democrats by 32 points since 2012. Non-college white people did long ago, but non-college people of color have now joined them in significant numbers. And two-thirds of Americans don't have college degrees. You cannot build a winning electoral coalition if you are losing voters who are not college grads.
All that being said, I would argue, tell me I'm wrong, that there have been no Republican policies that would help working class Americans advance in education, in healthcare, in employment, in investment, in other protections. You talk about neoliberalism as being the catalyst. I get it, certainly when it comes to things like trade policy and trade agreements and tax policy. But Democrats, for years, as long as I've been covering politics, and I'm 49 years old, I've been doing about 15 years, but certainly the Obama coalition and more, advocating for environmental issues, of course, and things like that you mentioned, but also for policies that would benefit working class Americans, like expanded access to healthcare, like tax policies that would be far more equitable for those Americans, like education and student loan relief. All those policies were proposed by Democrats and not Republicans. Like, I can't think of one policy outside of, I think, like the child tax care credit, which Democrats used and worked, and I think cut child poverty in half until Republicans said they didn't like it anymore. What do I have wrong about that history?
I think there's nothing wrong with your history. You're a Democrat talking to a Democrat. I think the Democrats do better for working people. I don't think they've done good enough for working people, for a simple reason. Virtually every American used to earn more than their parents. And among people born in 1980, only half will. So people in the middle, not people who are in low income or people who are rich, but people in the middle, feel that both parties have failed them. For a simple reason, both parties have failed to support their ability to sustain a steady middle class life. And that's because, if wages had continued to rise when productivity did, like they did after World War II, wages would be 43% higher than they are today. And for the 15 years before Trump was elected the first time, virtually all of the net job growth, virtually all, was in gig work and temporary jobs. And so that's why people are very, very angry. And what Republicans do, and Trump is a genius at this.
Selman, yeah.
Is he connects with that economic anger, and he channels it. Now, he connects with that economic anger, and he channels it against cultural elites, against the top 20%, against college grads, against professionals. And he channels that anger away from the economic elites who stole these folks' future. So the move for the left just seems to me to be so clear. We need to connect with that economic anger, acknowledge that it's legitimate anger, and redirect it against the economic elites that have produced this sorry situation.
I mean, I fully agree with all that, but just to break it down, given one idea or one argument, one policy, the thing that's so frustrating to me is that it's so hard for politicians and Democrats and government to tell people the good things that they've done. And I've seen them try to do it, but specifically I would look at the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which was the government agency spearheaded by now Senator Elizabeth Warren before she became senator,
Yep.
and Barack Obama. What like that idea was wasn't a perfect solution, but it was created as a result of the financial industry destroying the economy with deregulation. The CFPB was created to protect Americans, not only from the financial, from the big banks, but from all kinds of different scams and frauds. And it was working and doing a great job. But Republicans did a great job at scapegoating like poor black people for buying homes they couldn't afford, as opposed to diagnosing the actual problem. In fact, when they did the autopsy on it, the Financial Crisis Inquiry Commission banned words like deregulation and credit default swaps. They banned the words that were the causes of the actual problems. And they do that with other things like climate change. They ban all kinds of words that are the problems. How do you combat that? And how do you tout your successes when you actually have them? Like the example I'm giving.
Well, I mean, the easiest way to explain this at this particular moment in time is that Democrats are focused on defense of democracy. Defense of democracy was one of the top issues that Kamala Harris stressed.
Right.
And to this day, I don't know about your crowd, but my crowd, that's all they can talk about. And I think it's really important, and I'm very upset at what's happening in this country. And I think we need to defend democracy. But what we need to do to defend democracy in the long term is really different from what we need to do to defend democracy in the short term. In the short term, we need resistance. We need resistance in Congress, on the streets, in the courts. But in the long term, we need to recognize that non-college voters are not, Trump voters, defense of democracy was way, way down for them in their list of priorities. Inflation and the economy were number one and number two. And guess who was talking about inflation and the economy? Now, Trump was lying, don't get me wrong, but he was talking about it. He was connecting with people where they were about the issues that were their highest priority. Whereas we were talking about the defense of democracy, and they feel like democracy failed them. And so for us, for Democrats, it's not a good look right now to be seen as defenders of the status quo. And you know who it's going to help? It's going to help the far right.
How does defending the status quo help the far right?
If Democrats are seen as defending the status quo that failed non-college Americans as they were losing touch with the American dream, then we're going to continue to lose elections. I mean, there's also more of I sense a few policy wonk genes in you. So let me talk policy for just a minute. The kinds of economic policies that very often Democrats bring forward, think of, again, Kamala Harris, and again, what's happened is part of a much longer arc. But just as an example, $25,000 for housing. That is a government redistribution program. Right. That is not creating a fair labor market. So that's a misconnect right there. Think about the other things that she really focused on, or that Democrats often focused on. Think about raising the minimum wage. Now, I am super passionate about raising the minimum wage because I've worked on issues related to poverty. That's super important for poor people. But you know what? For these middle status voters who are Trump's base, the minimum wage is what they're trying to avoid. They're not interested in raises the minimum wage. It doesn't connect with them. Paid leave. Paid leave is something I feel passionately about. Really, I've worked for it for decades. But if you don't have a stable middle-class job, if you're stuck in gig work, if you're just trying to get by, if you're patching together 3 part-time jobs, paid leave doesn't seem like the highest priority for you. And so a lot of the economic policies that Democrats talk about don't connect with the middle status voters that are flocking to the far right in Europe, and in Europe as well as the United States.
That's a good point about Europe as well. But the other issue that we haven't really talked about, but I feel like it's always the issue, and maybe you don't, and you're the scholar, you've written a lot about this, but Joan, I think that race is everything. I think it's beyond everything. I think Trump has blamed so much. I mean, he made up all kinds of crazy shit. Haitians are eating your cats and dogs. I mean, he has blamed so much on black and brown people, and so have Republicans forever scapegoating them. To me, every policy we talk about, this is an argument I think I probably will die on this hill, that everything comes back to race for conservative Republicans, and including for plenty of liberal Democrats who don't show up and stand side by side with me at school board meetings and so on because they're comfortable. They don't go to protests because they're comfortable. And while they, rhetorically would like to advocate for black and brown folks and believe in human and civil rights, they're not going to change too much about our, upper middle class, liberal, suburban lifestyle. So I feel like race underpins anything. Tell me I'm wrong.
I've studied racism in organizations for 15 years, and I've never seen an organization where race wasn't structuring who got the good work, who didn't get the good work, who was seen as a good worker, who wasn't seen as a good worker. Racism is really, really important in organizations. It's really important in politics, but we have to understand the role that it's playing. If you are a racist, you are voting for Trump. I'm simplifying the math somewhat, but that's basically what the math shows. But the math also shows that that's not why he keeps winning. Because that's not a large enough vote share to win.
Well,
Thank the Lord. Thank the Lord. And so he's winning because he also attracts a much larger group of voters. And according to some studies, these voters' attitudes don't differ, racial attitudes, they don't differ from those of non-Trump voters. Those are the voters that we need to focus on as Democrats.
I think a statistic that would illustrate your point is that more black and brown folks voted for Trump this time than last time. But in that case, I would say that there's a lot of black and brown racist people. Black folks can uphold white supremacy and women can uphold patriarchy, as you, I'm sure, agree with. But I mean, in that case, it would seem like they were scapegoating like trans kids, for which there's like 2 of them. And it animated a lot of black and brown folks in my town not to show up for the school board. And another, what do you think about why those folks voted for Trump this time around where they didn't last time? You got more of vote, and mostly male, right? I think. Mostly men?
Mostly male. Yeah.
Isn't that
racist? As I mentioned at the top that since 2012, there's been a 32-point shift away from Democrats among non-college voters of color. I think that, one of the things that always amazes me is that we don't think that if something is about race, that means it's not about gender. But we do think that if something's about race, that's not about class. It's about both. And one of the, not the only, but a strong reason you saw a sharp shift towards Trump among men of color was because Trump enacts a very established form of non-elite masculinity. It's called bad but bold.
Right.
I think it was Kanye West who said, "Oh, I love Trump because he has dragon energy." That may be a slightly misquote, but the dragon energy was there. It's a certain form of masculinity.
Right.
Again, Trump is a genius at connecting with people. And, the research shows that when men's masculinity is threatened, they tend to double down on masculinity. And when men can no longer be providers, their masculinity is threatened.
Oh, don't get me started on that. Yeah. I think that's a huge.
I have to convince you on that one. So when you have not only the poor men, but middle class men who can't provide for their families, their masculinity is being threatened. And one of the ways to show just how macho they are is by voting for Mr. Macho. And that includes white men, and that includes men of color.
Weird definition of masculinity and macho that we have in this country that we would ever afford it to a guy who's none of those things really, just a good
Well,
talk.
that's the beauty of taco tariffs, by the way. I mean, why aren't we doing more? Trump always chickens out taco tariffs. It drives him nutsy. When somebody asked him about it in a press conference, he really got upset. Why are we allowing Trump to claim that he's Mr. Macho? Because I agree with you, he's not.
Well, I'm always trying to push back on that idea and always really engage in the conversation about men and masculinity in this country and elsewhere. Let me go back to the earlier point you made, though, in terms of in our circles, yes, everybody, Kamala Harris, the campaign, talking about saving democracy. But and I was one of those people too, but what I didn't realize, I suppose, is that I overestimated voters and Americans' understanding of civics and history. And I'm not going to say Americans are dumb, because I think that cheapens it. I used to say that kind of thing, but I think it's lazy. I myself don't have a college degree. I think intelligence is measured in all kinds of weird ways, and we should redefine it. And I think the guy who I think is really dumb about politics is very smart about, fixing HVAC in a way that I would never know. So I think it's cheap and I think it's shorthanded. That being said, democracy never put any food on anybody's table, but unions and collective bargaining did. And working class folks know the benefits of organizing and organized labor. And the only argument against it for working class folks is, again, racism. I'll never forget the CNN analyst who I was talking to, who I had a lot of respect for. I said, why would a white union member vote for Mitt Romney? And he said, because Barack Obama's black. Do I have it wrong? I mean, isn't collective bargaining a pretty simple idea for any working class folk to understand that they at least want to have the right and access to that idea?
Well, I think you're dead right that, and I'm so glad to say that you used to be a little freer with calling people stupid. As someone who has degrees from Yale, Harvard, and MIT, there are a lot of people. It's like, I've met the people who run the world, and that's why we're where we are. So just saying.
I hear you.
But this idea that of calling people stupid, that is what fuels far right populism. Because left populism is what I've been trying to do here. They're robbing you blind. Right populism is they're looking down on you. So we need to stop calling people stupid, for sure. I've forgotten where else I was going with that. Maybe you'll remind me.
I think it's an important point, and I'm glad that you're picking up on that. I was talking about the collective bargaining. Why then don't people?
Oh, you know what? Oh, I wanted to share with you. I was just reading the coolest study that measures, yeah, exactly, the divergence between support for big business and support for unions. And it's the largest, I think, if I remember correctly, it's the largest that's ever been measured. The support for unions in the United States has skyrocketed from being kind of low to being pretty peachy right now. And that's because American workers realize they've gotten screwed. And they have gotten screwed. And they realize that one of the key ways to increase their power is to band together in unions. Now, unions aren't perfect. Religion isn't perfect. Neither are you, and neither am I. Perfect ain't on offer in this fallen world. But unions, although they're not perfect, are absolutely vital.
I mean, but if that's the case, and unions are becoming more popular, and you can measure such things, obviously. I mean, I remember being on CNN and pointing to a graph on TV. Correlation isn't necessarily causation, but income inequality went down as union membership went down. I mean, it has to have a huge part to do with it. But if what you're saying is true, and obviously it is, the states that are conservative, the red states, they're anti-union. They call themselves right to work. I call them right to work for less states, but they're overwhelmingly anti-union in those states. They'll do anything they can to prevent a union from forming at the Toyota plant in Alabama or whatever other.
Who's the they? You know, who's the they?
Well,
Um, I those southern states are anti-union, and that's one of the reasons why manufacturing jobs in the United States moved from the formerly industrialized Midwest to the South. So I think I mean, I think, as I say, I can't remember what the statistic is right now. I think 70% of Americans are pro-union, and I would suspect that the support is less dense in the South, but there has to be a lot of union support in the South to have a number that high.
I mean, the private sector is different than the public sector in terms of unions, obviously. But I mean, like teachers,
And
they've
workers,
been demonized.
you know, the merchant right is really, really good at frightening workers and
Yeah,
saying to them, if you have unions come in here, we are going to make sure you lose your jobs. I
absolutely.
don't say that I don't fault the workers for that. I fault us for having a system that allows big money to threaten people like that.
That's a good point, a fair point for sure. The system, but I also always come back to the world that I've come up in, media, and media so often dominates on the right and demonizes any kind of progressive policy to the point where obviously you've written about this and so have others. People vote against policies that would benefit them and their families every election.
I think we really have to. I mean, I really resist the voters are duped narrative, because I think that's one of the ways that we send the message to people that we are cultural elites who think you're stupid. We are cultural elites who are looking down on you. I think these people are as smart as I ever was. They're dealing with very different lives. Blue collar lives have blue collar assumptions and blue collar truths and blue collar pleasures, and they're quite different from my life. But I don't think that they make sense in their lives just the way my truths make sense in my
Okay.
life.
Now we'll have to pick up here. I'll make this one argument and then I'll let you go because I've taken you way over time. But I think we disagree here. And it's my media point. Again, not saying they're stupid, but I will tell you this. I'll give you one example. I'm white. I live in an upper middle class, Rockland County, just north of New York City. And we can talk about socioeconomics and so on. But my generation of Americans, white liberals even, forget about conservatives, white liberals, are freaking terrified of things like kidnapping and crime. And when you say what you said about, I'm not going to tell them that what they're seeing or feeling isn't true, I am. I'm going to tell you right now to any one of my liberal or conservative neighbors, we live in the safest place in America, but they believe, Joan, that there are all kinds of violent crimes being committed, but they aren't. They aren't. They don't even know anybody who knows anybody, even anecdotally, who's had their kid kidnapped, yet they won't let their kids out of their sight. The reason for that is because they are told, in this case by conservatives, that crime in your district is terrible and will save you. It's not. It's literally the safest place to live, one of the safest neighborhoods in communities in the country, and my neighbors think it's dangerous. How do you square that?
I think I think that some of your, I mean, I actually write about this in my book. I grew up partly in Venezuela, and my
Cool.
image from when I was a kid in Venezuela is of a concrete wall with broken glass on the top. And when I came home to the United States, and looked at New England with short white picket fences, what I thought is, if you want a safe society, don't tolerate high levels of inequality, because that's what that tall fence with broken glass on the top represented. We have had sharp increases in inequality, and as a result, we've had sharp increases in felt insecurity. That is, if you don't like the feeling of insecurity, get rid of the feeling of inequality, or get rid of the reality of inequality. So I think that what you've talked about, this sense that there's threats lurking outside the door, is an impact on elites of the kind of growth of inequality that we've been talking about, and its impact. We've been talking about its impacts on non-elites, but this is one of its impacts on elites. It sucks. We should address the inequality.
I I think that's the root cause, but I still don't think it's answering my questions. Why do my neighbors not want to let their kids go out in the safest neighborhood in the country where nobody they know has had any problems? My neighbors won't let their kids go to New York City, which is also almost as safe as it's always been. I say to them, making fun of them, and this is what I shouldn't do, but I've said to people, I'm like, you know that there are kids that live in New York City, right? You know there are kids that live in the city and have and
And they're not dead.
and they're not getting pushed on the subway. That's what I heard. I don't want to let my kid go to New York City and ride the subway. She'll get pushed on the subway. Like, I mean, I don't know.
I tell you, it's a cultural thing. And I think you're talking about upper middle class people. If you're not, I mean, that's different. The other thing you're pushing, which I think pushing into, which I think is really important, we probably don't have time to talk to, is, social media, and the media and the news environment is making everything much worse.
For sure.
And this is a really good example.
Well, that's my point. But I was actually thinking of traditional media demagoguing and demonizing, all kinds of things that don't need to be, or just straight up lying about things. Donald Trump is saying we need more clean coal. Like, how come people think that's how come you could think? I will say that
I tell you,
if you think burning coal is good for you, then I don't want to say you're dumb, but like, get a piece of coal. Get a piece of coal. Put it in your hand.
Well, I mean, you've mentioned climate change a couple times. Climate change is the third highest priority for college grads, and God knows it's high for me. But for the average American, it's 17th. And there's a very simple reason for that has nothing to do with whether people are smart or stupid. It's because these fragile and failing middle class families, they're worried about the end of the month, not the end of the year.
I think
Again, you have to look at it from their point of view.
I think that's a great point, but I'll criticize young people too, because I work in this space with young people, and obviously the ones that are really focused on it, I'm not talking about. But if you go up to your average 17, 20-year-old, which is the ages of my daughter, and I've raised them to be radical environmentalists, and yet still I'm not sure that my daughters will make a shared sacrifice. They want to fight climate change, but not if it costs them anything. I would argue young people are no different than the rest of us on that issue. And my last question is my favorite question of the month. I feel like every once in a while I come to an interesting conclusion to ask the smart people I get access to. It's this: in your life and in your career, when was the last time you saw Americans make a shared sacrifice, doing something for the greater good that means they might have a little bit less or a little bit of discomfort? My argument is there hasn't been anything in this country since World War II. And my evidence for it is during COVID, people wouldn't even wear a mask. They wouldn't even stay 6 years. They thought they were if you think you're being inconvenienced in any way, even though this person might die, you're not changing it. I wish I was wrong. Am I?
Well, I don't see it the same way. I mean, we could talk about masks and masculinity. We don't have time, but that's another thing that's about. But I see people behaving in selfless ways every day. And for a very simple reason, I've developed a dairy allergy. Many Ashkenazi Jews have a dairy allergy. So I've developed a dairy allergy. Oh. And I go to airports, I go all over and talk to people. And I know, again, because I've studied poverty, I mean, these people are earning like $7.50 to maybe $18 an hour. And they are so kind to me. They are so mindful about whether they're going to give me something that is going to make me sick. And, I earn so many multiples of what they earn, and they treat me with such grace. And I think there's a lot of grace that we see every day that we don't notice.
I fully agree with you. And I'm
You don't think that's solidarity with a fellow human being?
Solidarity with a fellow human being is not what I'm referring to. What I'm referring to is a community shared sacrifice where everybody in your town or your state or your country says, I agree, let's do this policy for the greater good. I absolutely think on an individual basis, people are wonderful and beautiful. And I'm so glad to hear that that is your experience. I certainly think that that's wonderful. And I'm sorry you can't have cheese. Does it really mean you can't have cheese, or just like you can't have a glass of milk?
Can't even have croissant.
Oh, I'm sorry, Joan.
I mean, the levels of oppression that we have to deal with.
Well, your pronunciation of croissant is really showing your elitism
Says
as well.
it all, right?
More
I do think, I mean, there is research, and unfortunately, you've discovered I'm a person who can talk for basically ever, so you can cut me off anytime you want. But there's research that shows that there's a very specific group of Americans that is extremely highly individualistic and not very communal,
Yeah.
and that is elite people. That is elite people. Working class people, blue collar people are lower in individualism and much higher in solidarity and community spiritedness than the elites are.
I think
We
that's
just haven't tapped it. We haven't tapped it.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's
Now,
one of the reasons people like Trump rallies. They're fun. 70% of Trump voters think he's fun. God bless him. And it's a way they feel they're joining a community where their angers are being named, and they all care passionately about the same things.
is true. And the same is true for my community around the podcast. The same is true for all of these rallies that I've been going to. The same feeling is true. You show up and you have a sense of solidarity.
The No Kings rallies. The No Kings rallies. Yeah.
There's the same sense of solidarity where you feel like you're on the same planet as other people, and you're reminded of your morality and
yet there has been a corrosion in solidarity. And I'll just give you one last story.
Sure.
A friend of mine lives in Iowa City, and they've had terrible flooding in Iowa City. They had terrible flooding, I don't know, quite a while back, maybe 15 years ago. I'm probably getting the dates wrong. And she said everybody was there, and they were all passing sandbags, and the whole community was there. And then in the more recent floods in Iowa City, some very rich people hired people to sandbag their properties, of course, creating worse situations for everybody downstream. And you're right, there has been a corrosion of what we owe to each other. I couldn't agree with you more.
Okay. Well, I'm going to keep talking to you about that and everything else. Today, I'm very excited and very grateful that I got to connect with you for the first time, and I hope that we can do it again. This is a really interesting conversation, and talking to an author, journalist, scholar like yourself about these issues that you've been writing and talking about your whole career, and the way that you talk about them. I think we have chemistry, Joan.
I think we do. I've really, really enjoyed it. Thanks for the invitation.
Good. We'll talk again soon.
Okay. Bye-bye.
And all right, you can click right out, Joan. You can just hit that red X. And
okay, enjoyed it. Hope we do it again.
All right, thank you. I'll be in touch.
Bye-bye.
Bye. It is weird for the 9 people that are left, that will only be the ones that see this. And I guess anybody that watches it, because I don't edit it out on YouTube. Often I'm torn between ending the interview, or ending the stream rather, and continuing to talk to my guest, or just ending it all. And I let her go because I wanted to say thank you. I don't know why I let her go. I should have kept talking to her, but it's just weird. I got to figure out how to end these. I don't know how to end these. I'm going to end this. Thanks for watching, you guys. Thanks for being here. And I will talk to you later.